Officer Brian Matthew, identification number 5823, from the Riverside Police Department, observed an African-American man at a bus stop holding a white cane and immediately jumped to the conclusion of criminal intent rather than a disability. He insisted that Elijah relinquish what he deemed a weapon. When Elijah stated, "It is not a weapon, it is a mobility cane. I require it for safe passage," Matthew retorted, "I will determine what it is," and forcibly removed it from his grasp. Matthew subsequently removed Elijah's protective eyewear, placed him under arrest for weapon possession and providing false information, and compelled a visually impaired individual into a patrol vehicle, leaving him to navigate without his assistive device. What Officer Matthew failed to comprehend was that Elijah Turner had been without sight since his youth, was a recognized advocate for individuals with disabilities within the community, and that high-definition security camera footage and bystander recordings captured the entirety of the event. Furthermore, his unfounded assumption that a black man was feigning blindness would result in his dismissal from the force and a judgment of $9.2 million in federal court. Before we continue, could you inform us of your current location? Please share it in the comments section. We are always interested to know where our viewers are tuning in from. If you believe that prejudices based on race can have devastating consequences for innocent individuals and must be brought to light, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Elijah Turner's vision was lost at the age of 4 when a childhood ailment damaged his optic nerves, plunging him into perpetual darkness. Now, at 47 years old, he had spent 43 years navigating a world constructed for those with sight, and he had become remarkably adept at it. He worked as a counselor at the Veterans Disability Resource Center, assisting fellow disabled veterans in adjusting to life with their injuries. He contributed to the city's ADA Compliance Board, offering guidance to local authorities on accessibility matters. Twice weekly, he conducted mobility classes, instructing individuals newly experiencing blindness on the proper use of white canes for safe navigation. His existence was fulfilling, productive, and self-sufficient, built upon decades of dedicated effort and the tools that enabled his independence. Paramount among these tools was his white cane, a foldable mobility aid adorned with red reflective bands, which he carried with him at all times. On this particular Tuesday afternoon in late September, Elijah was seated on the bench at the Riverside Avenue bus stop, his cane resting across his lap, awaiting the number 7 bus that would transport him home following a demanding day at the resource center. He was wearing dark protective glasses to shield his light-sensitive eyes. His work satchel, containing documents, his laptop, and materials for his upcoming mobility class, was placed beside him. This bus stop was familiar ground. He had utilized this very stop 5 days a week for the preceding 6 years, occupying the same bench and taking the same route home. Other regular commuters recognized him, and the bus drivers made it a practice to announce their route numbers upon arrival, ensuring Elijah knew which bus had arrived. It was 5:20 in the afternoon, and the bus stop was moderately populated with individuals concluding their workday. Elijah sat quietly, engrossed in an audiobook through one earbud, leaving the other ear open to monitor his surroundings. He registered the sounds of approaching footsteps, the rumble of vehicle engines, conversations, and the general ambient noise of a city bus stop during peak hours. What he did not detect as it approached without the activation of its siren was Officer Brian Matthews' patrol car pulling into the bus stop area and parking at the curb. Matthew had been a member of the Riverside Police Department for 8 years, during which time his personnel file had accumulated 17 civilian complaints. 8 of these complaints originated from individuals with disabilities who accused him of harassment, disbelief, or excessive force. 3 specifically pertained to visually impaired individuals who alleged that Matthew had questioned the authenticity of their blindness, confiscated their canes, or accused them of exploiting their disability as a pretext for suspicious conduct. Internal Affairs had reviewed Matthew's record on 2 occasions, identifying concerning patterns, yet he had never faced significant disciplinary action. His superiors perceived him as an aggressive but effective officer, the type who readily initiated stops that others might avoid. Earlier that afternoon, dispatch had received a report from an individual describing a suspicious black male at the Riverside Avenue bus stop, allegedly in possession of some type of weapon or stick. The caller had terminated the conversation prematurely, providing only a vague description. When the call was broadcast over Matthew's radio, he was 2 blocks away and elected to respond. He arrived at the bus stop, surveyed the scene, and his gaze immediately fell upon Elijah, seated on the bench with the white cane across his lap. Matthew perceived a black man holding a stick, and his mind instantly made a connection to the weapons dispatch. The presence of red reflective bands on the cane, its evident function as a mobility aid, Elijah's wearing of dark glasses, and his calm demeanor, none of these details registered as significant. Matthew saw what his inherent biases dictated he should see, a potential threat requiring immediate confrontation. He exited his patrol car and approached the bench directly, his hand already moving towards his duty belt in a gesture of authority and preparedness. Elijah detected the heavy footsteps approaching, but did not react initially, as people frequently passed by the bus stop. It was not until Matthew stopped directly in front of him and spoke that Elijah realized the footsteps were directed at him. "Hey, you there? What are you doing?" Elijah turned his head towards the voice, his expression one of confusion. The tone was aggressive and demanding, unlike the typical interactions he had with individuals at the bus stop. "Me? Are you addressing me?" "I received a report about a suspicious black male with a dangerous weapon," Matthew stated, his voice amplified to the point that other bus stop patrons turned to observe. "That's you. What is that weapon you're holding?" Elijah's confusion intensified, yet he maintained a calm and patient tone, mirroring the approach he used when explaining matters to new clients at the resource center. "I am blind. This is my walking stick. It is a cane for the blind." "Be quiet! You're lying!" Matthew snapped, his voice escalating with irritation. "You can clearly see. You looked directly at me when I approached." Elijah experienced a familiar sense of unease, recognizing that this situation was deteriorating in a manner he had encountered previously, though never with such vehemence. "I turn towards your voice, sir. I am blind, not deaf. I cannot see you, and I am entirely sight-impaired, and this is a standard white cane." Matthew moved closer, and Elijah could discern the shuffle of his boots, sensing the intrusion into his personal space. "I don't believe you. You're likely casing this area, perhaps waiting for your associates to commit a robbery together." "Sir, I am simply waiting for the bus," Elijah replied, his voice now tinged with apprehension as he recognized the dangerous assumptions being made. He had provided counsel to enough veterans experiencing PTSD and trauma to discern when a situation was escalating beyond reasonable bounds. "Sure you are," Matthew said, his hand reaching towards the cane. "Hand over that weapon." Elijah instinctively drew the cane closer to his body, a protective maneuver born from an understanding of the tool's vital importance to his safety. "It is not a weapon. It is a mobility cane. I require it to navigate safely." "I will decide what it is," Matthew declared, his hand closing around the cane. Around them, other individuals at the bus stop had ceased their conversations and were observing the confrontation. A woman in her 30s retrieved her phone and began recording. A man in a business suit moved closer, his face conveying concern. The bus stop security camera, mounted on the shelter's roof, continued its uninterrupted recording, capturing every word and gesture in high definition. Elijah felt the tug on his cane and held firm, not with aggression, but with a steady grip, attempting to reiterate his explanation. "Officer, please, I need this. I cannot see. I cannot walk safely without my cane. I use it to detect obstacles, curbs, and steps. Please do not take it." Matthew yanked forcefully, and the cane dislodged from Elijah's grasp. Without it, Elijah was immediately disoriented. His primary means of navigating the world had vanished. He reached out instinctively, attempting to reorient himself, his hands seeking the familiar weight and balance of the cane. "Stop resisting," Matthew barked, misinterpreting Elijah's outstretched hands as an act of aggression rather than the desperate attempt of a blind individual to regain his bearings. "I am not resisting," Elijah responded, his voice now strained with genuine fear. "I am blind. I cannot see. Please return my cane." Matthew ignored him and reached for Elijah's face, grasping the dark protective glasses. "And take off those glasses. Let me see your eyes." "I require these," Elijah stated, attempting to avert his head. "My eyes are sensitive to light. Please, do not." Matthew ripped the glasses from Elijah's face, and the sudden exposure to the afternoon sun caused Elijah to squint and turn away. His eyes, damaged since childhood, failed to focus on anything. They moved erratically, searching for visual input that would never materialize, a clear indicator of severe optic nerve damage. However, Matthew saw not a disability, but what he wished to perceive. "See? You're fine. You're faking. You're under arrest." Elijah heard the click of metal and recognized the sound of handcuffs. "Under arrest for what? I have done nothing." "Possession of a weapon, resisting arrest, providing false information to an officer," Matthew stated, grabbing Elijah's arm and pulling it behind his back. The woman recording interjected, her voice sharp with indignation. "He's blind? That's his cane. What are you doing?" "Stay back, or you will be arrested for interference," Matthew retorted without even glancing at her. The man in the business suit stepped forward. "Officer, I assure you, that gentleman works at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. I know him. His name is Elijah. He is blind. That is his mobility cane." Matthew ignored him and snapped the second handcuff onto Elijah's other wrist. Elijah stood there, cuffed, without his cane, without his glasses, completely disoriented and unable to see anything around him. He could hear voices, the protests of bystanders, the officer radioing for backup, but he had no visual reference point, no way to navigate, and no means to protect himself from stumbling into obstacles. "I cannot see," Elijah said again, his voice breaking slightly. "I do not know where I am. Please, I need my cane." "You will retrieve it at the station," Matthew replied, steering him roughly towards the patrol car. Elijah stumbled, unable to perceive the curb, and Matthew caught him with an exasperated grunt. "Watch your step." "I cannot watch anything," Elijah said softly. "I am blind." But Officer Brian Matthew had already made up his mind. He had decided it was a falsehood, and nothing Elijah said would alter his conviction. The security camera documented the entire incident. The witness phones captured every moment. Within the hour, the video would begin circulating across social media, revealing to the world precisely what transpired when a police officer refused to acknowledge the blindness of an individual. Matthew guided Elijah towards the patrol car, one hand gripping his arm, treating him as any other suspect being taken into custody. Elijah stumbled twice on the short walk from the bench to the curb due to his inability to see where he was placing his feet. Each time he lost his balance, Matthew tightened his grip and stated, "Stop fighting me," despite Elijah not resisting at all, but simply being a blind man attempting to walk without the cane that typically alerted him to the presence of obstacles. "I am not fighting," Elijah said, his voice strained. "I cannot see the ground. I do not know where to step." Matthew opened the rear door of the patrol car and placed his hand on the top of Elijah's head to guide him into the seat. Elijah bumped his shoulder against the doorframe, unable to see the opening, and Matthew pushed harder. "Get in the car." Elijah sat down on the hard plastic seat, his hands still cuffed behind his back, completely disoriented. He had no awareness of his orientation within the vehicle, could not see the interior, and was unable to determine if there were any objects in front of him that he might impact if the car braked suddenly. The door slammed shut, and he heard Matthew walk away. Through the closed window, Elijah could discern raised voices outside. The woman who had been recording was still present, and her voice carried clearly, "You just arrested a blind man. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was waiting for the bus." Matthew's voice responded, sharp and dismissive. "Ma'am, I instructed you to stay back. This does not concern you." "I am recording this," the woman declared. "Everyone witnessed your actions. You took his cane and arrested him for being blind." "He was in possession of a weapon and falsifying his condition," Matthew stated. "Now step back, or you will be accompanying him in the car." The man in the business suit interjected once more. "Officer, I am informing you that this gentleman is employed at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. He is a counselor. He teaches mobility classes for visually impaired individuals. You have made an error." "I have not made an error," Matthew responded, though a defensiveness had entered his tone, suggesting a nascent sense of uncertainty. "I responded to a weapons call and apprehended a subject matching the description." Another voice joined the exchange, that of an older woman who had also been waiting for the bus. "I see him here every day for years. He always has that cane. He is blind. Anyone can see that." Matthew returned to his patrol car and entered the driver's seat, effectively ending the discussion. He radioed dispatch. "This is Unit 47. I have one subject in custody, en route to central booking, charged with weapons violation and providing false information." Dispatch acknowledged his transmission, and Matthew pulled away from the curb. In the back seat, Elijah remained perfectly still, attempting to orient himself through the sounds and motion of the vehicle. He could hear traffic and sense the turns, but nothing provided a visual reference, as no such reference was available. He had been without sight for 43 years, and at this moment, seated in the back of a police car without his cane and glasses, he felt more helpless than ever before. "Officer Matthew," Elijah stated, maintaining a calm and respectful tone, "I need you to understand something. I'm genuinely blind. I possess medical documentation. I'm registered with the State Commission for the Blind. I can provide you with the names of individuals who can confirm my condition. Please, contact someone before we reach the station." "You can explain all of that during booking," Matthew replied without turning around. "My cane is a medical device," Elijah continued. "Confiscating it is akin to taking a wheelchair from someone who cannot walk. I require it for my safety. I need it to navigate. Please do not treat it as evidence. It is not a weapon." Matthew offered no response. The silence persisted for the remainder of the journey, which lasted approximately 8 minutes. Upon their arrival at the police station, Matthew parked in the garage and proceeded to the rear door to open it. Elijah heard the click of the door handle and attempted to prepare himself for what lay ahead. "Step out," Matthew commanded. Elijah moved cautiously, sliding across the seat until his feet touched the ground. He stood up slowly, uncertain of his surroundings, and Matthew grasped his arm once more. They proceeded through what sounded like a parking garage, then through a doorway leading into the station. Elijah could hear voices, footsteps, and the reverberation of a large indoor space, but he could not see any of it. He was entirely reliant on Matthew for guidance, and Matthew was treating him as a criminal rather than a blind individual in need of assistance. They reached the booking area, and Matthew paused. Elijah heard another voice, a deeper male tone that sounded older and carried an air of authority. "What do we have here?" the voice inquired. "Weapons violation," Matthew responded. "Subject was at a bus stop with what appeared to be a weapon. Refused to cooperate. Claimed he was blind." "Claimed," the other voice questioned, a note of concern detectable. "He is feigning it," Matthew asserted. "I observed him looking around. He is fabricating his blindness." Elijah felt a flicker of hope as the second voice sounded skeptical of Matthew's explanation. He spoke up, addressing the newcomer. "Sir, I am not feigning anything. I have been blind since the age of 4. I have medical records. I work at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. I was merely waiting for my bus when Officer Matthew confiscated my mobility cane and arrested me." There was a brief pause, followed by the other voice stating, "Sergeant Williams. And you are?" "Elijah Turner," Elijah replied. "I require my cane back. I cannot see. I cannot navigate without it." Sergeant Williams stepped closer, and Elijah heard his footsteps circle him. "Officer Matthew, where is this weapon you are referring to?" "In my trunk," Matthew stated, "and it is some sort of stick." "Retrieve it," Williams ordered, his tone leaving no room for suggestion. Matthew departed, and Elijah remained, handcuffed, unable to see the sergeant or anyone else in the room. He heard murmurs, the sounds of other individuals moving about, the general hum of a busy police station operating around him, and he waited, hoping that someone would finally listen and comprehend that he was speaking the truth. Matthew returned, carrying Elijah's white cane, and placed it on the booking desk. Sergeant Williams picked it up and examined it closely, turning it over in his hands. The cane bore distinct red reflective bands, a rubber tip designed for tactile feedback, and a small engraved plate that read, "Property of Elijah Turner. If found, please call the State Commission for the Blind at phone number." Williams looked at Matthew with an expression that had shifted from skepticism to outright anger. "This is a standard mobility cane for the visually impaired. It has reflective safety bands and a registration number. What part of this resembles a weapon to you?" Matthew's face flushed. He was holding it in a suspicious manner. The call stated a black male with a weapon. "The call stated a stick," Williams corrected, accessing the dispatch log on his computer. "And this is unequivocally a white cane, not a weapon." He turned to Elijah. "Mr. Turner, I am going to remove these handcuffs. I apologize for what has transpired here." The metal restraints clicked open, and Elijah rubbed his wrists. Williams handed him the cane, and Elijah's hands closed around it with evident relief. He extended it immediately, tapping the floor to orient himself, using the familiar tool to construct a mental map of his surroundings. "Where are my glasses?" Elijah inquired quietly. Williams looked at Matthew. "He removed his glasses to verify he wasn't faking," Matthew replied, his voice devoid of its earlier confidence. Williams walked to Matthew's patrol car and retrieved the dark glasses from the front seat. Upon his return and presentation of the glasses to Elijah, the sergeant's jaw was set with barely suppressed rage. Elijah put on the glasses, and the relief on his face was instantaneous. His damaged eyes ceased their futile attempt to process the painfully bright lights of the police station. "Mr. Turner," Williams stated carefully, "could you recount the exact events at the bus stop?" Elijah meticulously detailed the entire encounter, the confrontational stance, the demand for the immediate surrender of the weapon, the disbelief in his declaration of blindness, the allegations of reconnaissance for a burglary, the forceful confiscation of his cane and spectacles, and the subsequent apprehension. As he recounted the events, Williams accessed information on his computer, his expression hardening. "Officer Matthew," Williams stated, his voice devoid of warmth, "Mr. Turner's name has just surfaced in our records. Do you have any idea why?" Matthew simply shook his head. "Because he is officially recognized as a member of the city's ADA Compliance Advisory Board. He provides guidance to the mayor's administration and the police department concerning accessibility for individuals with disabilities. Furthermore, he serves as a counselor at the Veterans Disability Resource Center." Williams rotated the monitor to face Matthew. "He has been visually impaired since early childhood. This information is thoroughly documented across all city databases." A pallor spread across Matthew's countenance. Williams continued, "There is more. I've just received an electronic communication from the chief's office. Apparently, a recording of your arrest has already achieved widespread notoriety. 3 million views within the past hour. The mayor's office is demanding an explanation as to why one of our officers apprehended a disability advocate and confiscated his mobility aid." Elijah spoke softly, but with a devastating clarity. "Officer Matthew, I have lived without sight for 43 years. For 40 of those years, I have utilized a white cane. My work involves instructing other visually impaired individuals on the safe and effective use of canes. I actively participate on the board responsible for reviewing the police department's adherence to disability legislation, and today you determined that none of this held any validity simply because you were unable to accept that a black man was conveying the truth about his own physical state." He paused, allowing his words to resonate. "I've encountered law enforcement encounters previously. I've been questioned. I've been asked to present my identification. However, I've never before been accused of falsehood by an officer alleged to be fabricating a medically documented condition, had my assistive device seized, and been placed under arrest while being rendered incapable of perceiving my surroundings or the unfolding events." Williams drew Matthew aside, his voice a harsh whisper that nonetheless carried to Elijah's ears. "You apprehended a blind individual. You confiscated his cane. You removed his protective eyewear. You executed this entire sequence on camera, and you perpetrated this upon someone who, by definition, advises this very department on precisely how to avoid perpetuating the very actions you just committed." Matthew attempted to interject. "I was unaware." "You failed to inquire," Elijah interjected, his voice slicing through the room's atmosphere. "You observed a black man with a cane and immediately surmised criminality. You heard me state my blindness and presumed dishonesty. You possessed ample opportunity to verify my condition, to examine the cane with due care, to pose fundamental questions, to contact the number inscribed upon my cane, to consult public records. You neglected all of these avenues because your preconceived notions had already dictated your conclusion." Williams turned back to Matthew. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Your badge and service weapon are to be placed on the desk. The chief requires your presence first thing tomorrow morning, and I can assure you that meeting will not be favorable for you." With trembling hands, Matthew deposited his badge and firearm onto the desk, his professional future visibly disintegrating in real time. Elijah stood, his cane now in hand, and his spectacles restored to their place, and delivered the final indictment with a cold, deliberate certainty. "I will be initiating a federal lawsuit citing violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, civil rights infringements, assault, and wrongful arrest. Furthermore, I will ensure that every particular of your conduct becomes a matter of public record, thereby informing other individuals with disabilities of the repercussions when an officer dismisses their lived experience of disability as unreal." He tapped his cane once on the floor, oriented himself towards the exit, and departed the police precinct with an intrinsic dignity that the officer who had detained him would never again possess. Officer Brian Matthew was dismissed from the Riverside Police Department 3 weeks following the incident at the bus stop. His termination notice cited numerous breaches, including discrimination based on disability, failure to adhere to ADA protocols, unlawful confiscation of medical equipment, false arrest, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Due to his termination for cause after a mere 8 years of service, Matthew forfeited his pension, his health benefits, and any prospect of future employment within law enforcement. The video depicting him forcibly seizing a blind man's cane had amassed over 20 million views, and his visage was now indelibly linked to one of the most flagrant instances of disability discrimination captured on film. Elijah Turner formally filed his federal lawsuit 6 weeks after the arrest. The legal filing was comprehensive and devastating, meticulously detailing violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, civil rights infringements under the 4th and 14th Amendments, assault and battery, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit named Officer Matthew personally and the Riverside Police Department, seeking $9.2 million in compensatory damages. Elijah's legal counsel convened a press conference where they presented the bus stop security footage alongside the witness recording, offering multiple perspectives of Matthew, disregarding evident signs of disability, and forcefully seizing a blind individual's mobility aid. The city's legal team reviewed the footage and examined the medical documentation, verifying Elijah's blindness since the age of 4. They scrutinized Matthew's personnel file, uncovering 8 prior complaints lodged by individuals with disabilities, all describing analogous patterns of disbelief and aggression. It was evident that Matthew had undergone mandatory ADA training on 2 separate occasions and had signed acknowledgments confirming his comprehension of disability rights statutes. Challenging the lawsuit became untenable, the evidentiary basis was irrefutable, the public perception was overwhelmingly negative, and the plaintiff was a highly respected disability advocate who had been instrumental in drafting the very accessibility guidelines that Matthew had violated. The municipality offered a settlement of $2 million 3 months subsequent to the lawsuit's inception. Elijah's legal representatives summarily rejected the offer. "This is not merely a financial matter," they stated. "This concerns a systemic pattern of mistreatment towards individuals with disabilities that your department has demonstrably overlooked for years." The case proceeded to trial, where the jury heard testimony that visibly agitated some of its members. Elijah eloquently described the profound disorientation and fear he experienced without his cane, rendering him unable to ascertain his location or comprehend the events unfolding around him. Medical specialists elucidated that his specific form of blindness was demonstrably impossible to simulate, and that white canes are classified as protected medical devices under federal law. Additional individuals with disabilities shared their prior encounters with Matthew, articulating a consistent pattern of dismissal regarding the authenticity of their disabilities. Following a deliberation period of 5 hours, the jury rendered a verdict that sent reverberations throughout law enforcement agencies across the state. They found in favor of Elijah on every charge and awarded the full sum of $9.2 million, with $70 million designated as punitive damages, intended to penalize the egregious nature of the transgression. The jury foreman read a statement asserting that the defendant's actions were not simply erroneous, but profoundly inhumane. Depriving a blind person of their mobility device constitutes an assault, the statement declared, and doing so, based on the presumption of deception regarding their disability, introduces a layer of discrimination that this community will unequivocally not tolerate. Matthew initiated bankruptcy proceedings within weeks of the verdict. However, judgments stemming from disability discrimination cases are not dischargeable through bankruptcy. The court mandated lifelong garnishment of his wages. At 39 years of age, he found himself employed in overnight stocking positions at a warehouse, earning $12 per hour, with a substantial portion of each paycheck irrevocably committed to fulfilling a debt he would never fully liquidate. He became widely recognized as the officer who refused to acknowledge the blindness of a visually impaired man. This notoriety shadowed him through every employment interview, every background verification, and every endeavor to reconstruct even a semblance of the life he had irrevocably damaged. The Riverside Police Department underwent a comprehensive restructuring of its policies governing interactions with individuals with disabilities. The police chief, who had failed to adequately address Matthew's history of complaints, was compelled to retire. New mandatory training protocols were instituted, requiring officers to acknowledge and accommodate disabilities without question. A position for a disability liaison was established, staffed by advocates from the blind and disabled communities. Body camera regulations were reinforced to guarantee that all encounters involving individuals with disabilities were meticulously recorded and subsequently reviewed. 5 additional officers exhibiting similar complaint patterns were strongly encouraged to resign prior to formal investigative proceedings. Elijah utilized a portion of his settlement to establish the Disability Rights Documentation Project, an initiative dedicated to providing complementary recording devices and legal assistance to individuals with disabilities who encountered discrimination. He persevered in his professional capacity at the Veterans Disability Resource Center and continued his service on the city's ADA board, now wielding considerably augmented influence and respect. He addressed law enforcement academies nationwide, frequently holding his white cane aloft as he narrated his experience. "This is not a weapon," he would declare. "This represents liberation. This signifies autonomy. This is the instrument through which I navigate a world not inherently designed for my needs. And when you dispossess someone of it, you're not safeguarding the community. You're attacking an individual already engaged in a strenuous effort to traverse the world with a measure of safety." 5 years subsequent to that September afternoon at the bus stop, Elijah was honored with a National Disability Advocacy Award. Brian Matthew continued his manual labor, still making payments on a judgment that would remain with him for the remainder of his existence. The video persisted online, a perpetual testament to the consequences of allowing conjecture to supersede evidence and of officers rejecting the testimonies of disabled individuals concerning their own lived realities. The lesson conveyed was stark and unforgiving. Disabilities are not subject to belief or disbelief. They exist irrespective of whether an individual chooses to acknowledge them. And when figures of authority presume to possess superior knowledge regarding disabled individuals' bodies compared to the individuals themselves, the repercussions can be career-ending, financially ruinous, and enduring. True justice necessitates believing individuals when they articulate their identity and their requirements. Share this narrative if you have ever been compelled to substantiate your disability to someone who elected to deem you a fabricator. What protective measures do you believe are essential for individuals with disabilities when engaging with law enforcement? Offer your perspectives in the comments below. And if you concur that confiscating a person's mobility aid is never justifiable, please subscribe, as we are committed to presenting further accounts where ableism confronted accountability and ultimately failed.